U.S. wants to be a superpower, well, then you got to act like a superpower. And it means that you need to project stability in a region of the world that directly matters. And we're the only ones who can deliver it.
Welcome to Taking the Edge Off the Middle East, a series of casual conversations offering up insider knowledge about the most important issues affecting the broader Middle East. I'm Brian Katulis, host of the podcast and senior fellow here at the Middle East Institute. I want to thank our audience for joining in these discussions. I need you to do one thing. I need you to get on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and offer your ratings, offer your suggestions. Email us. We've gotten some really great emails, people who've written books recently. We'll get back to you soon. We want to talk to you, maybe bring you on the program. If you have any questions that you think we should be asking our guests, or even suggestions of guests, we want to bring that in. So that's one announcement. And also tell your friends about it. Tell them to come on in. The water's warm. The second announcement is a special announcement to me. It's Thursday, July 17th. And it's special to me, but I'll connect it to the audience and to everyone in the room. Just a few hours ago, a dear friend of mine passed away. And she was like a second mom to me. She's the mother of a good friend of mine who was my roommate in Villanova and at the American University in Cairo. And she was one of those people who I'm doing what I'm doing today in part because of her enthusiasm and her support for what I was doing. I came from a small town in central Pennsylvania. My parents were like, why do you want to go to the Middle East? You know, and a little reluctant. I'm sort of like that with my kid when he gets on his scooter. It's protection. You know, you want your kid to be. And Sue was always enthusiastic. She became one of my best pen pals, but then one of our best friends throughout life. And her death was not a surprise. She was older and she was in a condition where I had plenty of times to say goodbye to her. But the main point, we offer sort of advice, we hope, in this podcast to the future generation. And the main point is this, is that for those of you who have been supported by different people, who've backed you, who are mentors, don't waste any time. Show your love and appreciation for these people, because we are all the products of not just our family, but the people who supported us. So cheers to my friend Sue. I'll miss you very much. Now, on to happier topics and two people that I really appreciate.
Can I interrupt you for one moment? What was her full name?
Sue Weed. That's it.
Sue Weed.
Yeah, Sue Weed. Yeah.
Sue Weed.
She lived on Jolly Way. Yeah.
Real?
Yeah. And I just wanted to start on that note. It's a bit personal, but again, we try to give advice to the future generations, and that's my deal. That was the first voice, Daniel Silverberg, who's another dear friend that I appreciate and I've known mostly through professional circles, but we've become friends through the years. And he's going to talk about his career, and we're going to talk about an important topic with my other friend, Elisa Ewers, who also is in a sort of similar category to me, friend, but also dear colleague and trusted confidant on many different issues. And the topic we're going to talk about today is something that is near and dear to my heart. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I know you guys are too. And the topic is a sensitive one. It's one about the policy and politics of the Democratic Party on the Middle East. And we're going to have a wide-ranging, open discussion about this. We hope it's not the only discussion on this issue, because I'd love to invite other guests on in this topic. I'm planning to bring on Republican friends to talk about this as well, because there are many different strands of what's going on. But I wanted to start out the discussion usually where I end the discussion, because many of you may not know my friends Daniel and Elisa. They are household names in the foreign policy realm, I assure you, and everybody knows who they are, and they have a great deal of respect and a lot of trust and confidence in relationships with a lot of people. I want to start with Elisa first. What's your deal? Meaning, what's your foreign policy and political experience over the last few decades? Tell us about yourself.
So I'm going to start someplace different very quickly, but may Sue's memory be a blessing.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm just so pleased that I get to spend a few hours with friends and brains who I deeply, deeply admire. So thank you. So I just left the professional policy staff and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee just in the last few months. And so had a taste of what it's like to be in the ecosystem that is the legislative branch of U.S. government, which is fascinating and complicated and maddening all at the same time. Last 20 years, I've been in the executive branch, both in a Republican and Democratic administration, at the State Department, at the Department of Defense, at the National Security Council, and I'm a policy nerd. So my experience was blessed by having some great mentors, all working on Middle East policy issues. I spent some time in a think tank, and probably the most interesting and educational thing I've done over the last 20 years was be an adjunct professor at SAIS, because I got to spend time with a group of young minds who basically rejected every single thing I was trying to say to them.
That's good.
Which was
a good thing.
super fun and very humbling. So that's my deal.
How did you get into this? What was the spark that got you into this?
So I'm a first generation American, which I'm not sure a lot of people know about me.
Italian.
My parents are Italian, that's right. And I grew up in Southern Europe. So part of it was just a proximity, right? An interest in what was happening across the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Some personal reasons to care about the Middle East, family reasons to care about the Middle East. But this idea of the world from the perspective of the United States, but not about only the United States, was something that I carried with me, I think, as long as I can remember. But what got me into public service was the Iraq War.
Uh-huh.
And
The 2003 Iraq War.
yes, not the Gulf War, not the Iraq
You're not that old.
War. I am that old, but but not old enough to have actually been part of anything useful in that context. But the Iraq War of 2003 is what led me out of the private sector and into public service.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that with me. And thanks not only for being a great colleague, but a good friend. The other day, you sent me a photo from, I think it was a track too that we were involved with in Vienna. And we were sort of imitating that image of the glowing orb with the leaders on its hand, the hands on the glowing orb in Saudi Arabia in 2017. And there's an orb in Vienna, Austria. We were with a group of people trying to wrestle with the Iran problem, if I recall correctly. So thanks for being on the podcast. Daniel, over to you. What's your deal? How'd you get into this and all of that?
Terrific. Thanks for having me, Brian. A disclaimer that I'm going to do what my children say of I want to glaze you in terms of...
That's a word?
It is.
What? Glaze? Does anyone know what that means?
We're getting affirmative nods from the 20-somethings in the room that to glaze means I didn't know it either. To glaze means to compliment.
Wow, really? Yeah, they're shaking their heads the other way now, Daniel.
It's a great podcast. This is fantastic. I loved when you had David Shanker.
Yeah.
I'm honored to be on with you.
Great. Good to be with you.
What's my deal? Well,
yeah.
My interest in foreign policy stemmed from three things. Number one, it stemmed not from growing up in Southern Europe, but in, the Southern Europe of California, in Los Angeles. And in one light, California, you're on the edge of the Pacific, and simultaneously, I felt like I was in another planet, a very Hollywood-focused planet, and I felt like there is something more substantive that I want to be doing with my life. I want to get my hands dirty. And so I think like a lot of folks coming from Los Angeles in our circles, like Michelle Flournoy or Dan Freed, I look towards DC as this place of, oh my God, there are exciting, cool things being done.
Uh-huh.
And I particularly thank my father, who in 1988 brought me to 87, brought me to Washington for the March on Washington for Soviet Jewry.
Wow.
That was my first time here. And I met my congressman and future employer, Howard Berman, who, when you were mentioning Sue Weed, I made a note to myself of, I got to reach out to Howard and say hello and thank you.
Yeah.
And saw how policy was actually being done. And it was being done on the National Mall, of people beseeching their representatives saying, help us.
Yeah.
And I just found that exhilarating. So that was the first seed. Second seed was when I was in college, honestly, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew I wanted to be doing something interesting, and interesting meant international to me. And so I spent a summer at the State Department. And while that experience disabused me of the idea that I would ever be a good foreign service officer, I'm way too flamboyant and loud, and I wouldn't cut it.
Yeah.
But that the notion of working in a system like that, I found very compelling.
Yeah.
And then the last stop was I did an internship at the Pentagon right before 9/11 in the general counsel's office when I was in law school. And that's what really gave me the career direction of I want to do national security law. I need to be in DC. To do that, it led me to eventually go from a law firm back to where I interned in the Office of International Affairs at the Pentagon, and then eventually to Capitol Hill.
That's great. And you have great experience on Capitol Hill, both of you do, and in the executive branch. We're going to talk a lot about that. Before we get into all of that, and before we get into the topic, which is the politics and policy of the Middle East inside the Democratic Party, I want to ask you guys a substantive question. We're here at a think tank, the Middle East Institute, and we think about this all the time. What is America's key national security interest in that part of the world today? What's our strategy? Why should we care in 2025? How would you answer that, Elisa?
Well, I'd start with geography. Right? We should care about a place in the world that sits at the crossroads of Asia and Europe, that has the ability to affect the kinds of things that are strategically important to the U.S. economy, to U.S. security. These are pretty basic. They're core. They haven't evolved all that much over the last 70 or so years, but they're evergreen, right? I think the other evergreen pieces are we tend to want to support places that can be stable, right? And so caring about a Middle East that can be stable, that can contribute to stability in its neighborhood and around it, important to the U.S. But then there's the new things, right? The kind of complex crises of migration, the complex crises of supply chains, right? Middle East is central to all of that. Notice I didn't talk about oil, right? I think that's one of the kind of, and we'll talk about this, I think, over the course of the conversation, kind of old think versus today think. When you're thinking about the Middle East, energy supplies to the world are still important, right? But this idea that it's essential and vital to the United States, that's evolved. That's changed. But other elements of energy are vitally important, remain vitally important. So there are lots of reasons to still care about the Middle East. They probably should have never been in question, right?
But they have been.
But they have been.
And we're going to get into that and why, and all of that. Daniel, how would you answer that question? What would you say?
Yeah, it's, that's the perennial question that if you look at congressional debates from the 50s and 60s that certain members were raising, it was just a far quieter constituency of members at that time who were raising it now. I think the answers have totally evolved. The traditional answer, which is one I still totally agree with, is it's the affirmative. One, U.S. wants to be a superpower. Well, then you got to act like a superpower. And it means that you need to project stability in a region of the world that directly matters to our financial interests, to our economic interests. And we're the only ones who can deliver it. When I was looking at the Signal chat debate, obviously, there were a lot of negative implications from that. But one thing that I took from it was there was a clear recognition that if we want to protect Red Sea shipping, it's not going to be the Europeans who are going to be capable of doing it. It's got to be us. It's got to be on our bill. And I'm perfectly comfortable with paying that bill.
You're talking about that debate that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and then Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor at the time, and J.D. Vance, the Vice President, they all had, and it was shared with Jeffrey Goldberg, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, and that's an important point. That was another sort of note that even amongst those who were saying, hey, maybe we're doing too much in that part of the world, there was this necessity that we've got to be involved because it's a key arena for competition, and it's also a choke point and a place that is a bridge between the world's global economies.
Bingo. And you can't have it both ways of being a superpower and not be that level of hands-on, giving money, shaping what's trying to help develop in the region. So that's the affirmative argument.
Right.
I also think that there's a values argument there as well, particularly with regard to Israel and supporting democracies, even though I certainly don't want to relitigate the Iraq war.
Right.
But the notion of the U.S. being proud of its role as a force of democracy, of trying to support democratic actors in the region through things like the National Endowment for Democracy and IRI and NDI. 100% that is part of the equation of you want to be a superpower, you got to support our friends there. So that's the affirmative.
So there you go, folks. Middle of the summer 2025, Daniel Silverberg says values in U.S. foreign policy still matters. And I agree with him, even though it may not be the dominant strand right now. Yeah.
So that's the affirmative piece, and I think absolutely values matter. The negative piece goes back to that simple adage from 9/11. What happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East.
Right.
And for our own immediate security needs, we have to be actively engaged in making sure that the conflicts that are on any given day emerging in the Middle East don't proliferate into other parts of the world. And this is where, by the way, I think the argument has substantially shifted on Israel. And what I mean by that is I would struggle 20 years ago to explain to people, why should the U.S. really care about Israel? Why? Israel seemed like a nuisance more than anything from a security perspective, outside of folks who fundamentally believed in the values argument. But from a purely realist argument, I think it has been difficult at times to explain why should we be prioritizing Israel's needs over key Gulf allies, for example. I think that argument is now moot when we see the intelligence, the military, the economic cooperation that Israel provides.
And that's often not seen, and we'll get into that in the politics of it. But you wanted to respond there with something?
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. But that's not where the conversation is now, right? And kind of reminding people of that economic piece, that intelligence piece that has been cultivated over decades and decades of work from those behind the scenes to try and build that construct. The diplomats you talked about that I actually think you could have been, Daniel, and would have been excellent at. But that is exactly the kind of investment in the region that has been overshadowed by some of the political discussions we've had about the Middle East, certainly since the Iraq War of 2000.
Yeah, no, I would add to it. I think also there's this sense after 20 years after the Iraq War and 9/11 and things like this, that this was seen as a region of the past, meaning it got us stuck in the mud and we were there. And it was draining us of resources. What I think is interesting is an interesting strand between Trump 1.0, the Biden administration, and Trump 2.0 in the Middle East is this pragmatic recognition that these are countries, this is a region of the world that's trying to invest for their own betterment, but then also using those investments to create greater regional interlinkage and connect their region to the rest of the global engine, the engine of the global economy. And that's a new dynamic that is often not seen when we're debating sort of the next phase in the war, Gaza or Iran and things like that, right?
That's it. Maybe I'm jumping a little bit too quickly into the self-flagellation of our party. But from a national security perspective, no question, on the values front, Saudi Arabia, for example, and the U.S. have different governing systems.
Right.
They're not going to become a democracy anytime soon.
Newsflash.
I get that. However, if you want to look at a region of the world where I think the most dynamic economic activity is taking place that matters for the U.S., it's Saudi and the UAE. G42, the data center company that the UAE has grown, and the deal that the Biden administration worked in 2023, I think, to have Microsoft and NVIDIA rip and replace Chinese infrastructure in G42 so that the data centers that are going to be built throughout the Middle East and in Africa and other parts of the world have our technology. That is huge.
Yes. Yeah.
And I wish that more Democrats, not that they need to stand up and say, oh, we support the UAE and Saudi unconditionally, but would appreciate that there's so many dynamic developments on energy and the economic front and data centers that are so good for us that it would temper somewhat a lot of the criticisms I've seen over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
The irony of that, and I agree with all of it, is that if you look post-Cold War and the transition of the relationship between the United States and the Middle East that was interrupted in some ways by 9/11, right? I mean, that transition never really happened. Um, because of the need in many ways to build on the first Gulf War and kind of over securitize our relationship with the Middle East. The things that Daniel's talking about are exactly the answer to some of those criticisms of over securitization of the relationship, which I think many Democrats have expressed, certainly because of the Iraq War, but not only because of the Iraq War. And yet the things that are meant to shift away from that kind of old think about U.S. Middle East policy are the things that aren't kind of on the minds of or really appreciated by those who are involved in kind of the political assessment of where these.
And there's a lot of politics that are involved here. Go ahead, Daniel.
Well, I'll put it in very stark terms. I was struck by when MBZ and Sheikh Tahnoun came to Washington a number of months ago, that President Trump brought in, I think, three quarters of his cabinet to have a dinner with them. And when I heard that, I was just thinking to myself, damn it, why can't Democrats play that same game? Meaning, from what I understand during the Biden administration, there were so many hoops that the Emiratis had to get through to get senior level meetings with the White House or to have that kind of dinner. There were a number of fights taking place. You had your advocates saying, this is a key relationship we need to strengthen. And then you had a lot of forces saying, you don't want the U.S. appearing this close to the Saudis or the Emiratis. They have to earn that kind of dinner. And in my mind, just do the dinner. Just merge the relationship.
Yeah, we meet with lots of different peoples, and even when President Obama, when he was a candidate, he said he was the bold sort of thing. He was going to do diplomacy with North Korea. Remember when this was like so shocking? Exactly. And then Trump later sits down with the leader of North Korea and becomes a pen pal with him. But I want to move it along a little bit, and I want to widen the aperture. I'm going to restrain myself, and we'll get more into the politics and things like this of the Democratic Party. But I want to widen the aperture to the broader question of what's your take on the trajectory of U.S. politics on Middle East policy? And this is a big question of the past quarter century, from post 9/11 to present. And let me just indulge me for a second. I'm going to tell you my sort of brief answer to my own question, but I want you to respond or say, oh, that doesn't sound right. I look at this period from 2000 to 2025 as a three-act play on the politics of national security in the Middle East. Act number one was the war on terror / Iraq phase. I don't know, actually. I'm not a theater major. I love going to the theater, but I don't know if acts actually have titles in plays. But it's the war on terror. And sort of when 9/11 happened, Republicans using terrorism as a partisan wedge issue in 2002, in 2004, the swift boating of Karen. And then in that first act, when the Iraq War went bad, Democrats in kind sort of doing that in return. But that produced this sort of fragmentation between the parties and the hyper-partisan. Act two was the hyper-partisan fights between Republicans and Democrats, mostly on Israel and Palestine and on Iran. And this was mostly during the Obama administration, which you served. And in that sort of these complicated issues became something like what I've written, neo-Orientalism. These countries have become like props in our own political debates and sort of score settling and trying to, and it still was mostly on partisan lines, but then sort of within that, and these aren't clear sort of periods of these acts in terms of a timeline. Act three was this rise of populism and what I call neo-isolationism in both parties. It's sort of the dominant theme is blame America first. It's sort of the exhaustion of we've been in Iraq and Afghanistan for far too long. Now, of course, there's complexity in all of this, and you served in the White House of the Obama administration. When the ISIS challenge arose, there was a pretty bold, I think, response to it, not only from the Biden administration, but pretty strong bipartisan support to rise to the challenge. Just a few years after he won the nomination against Hillary Clinton, to say we've got to get out of Iraq, he had his Michael Corleone moment from Godfather 3. Just when I thought I was out, pulled me back in. So it was that three-act sort of play has produced this moment where in sort of somewhere between Act 2 and 3, diverse voices. And Daniel, you mentioned the march that you went to for Soviet Jewry and things like this. People who I think have genuinely deeply held connections and beliefs, either to Israel or Palestine, or concerns about another war in the Middle East with Iran, that we started to split ourselves not only on partisan sides, but also within the parties. And I know it went on for a while there, but what's wrong with that sort of three-act play? What would you add to it? You guys had front row seats in the administrations and in Congress, and you saw a lot of these fights unfold. Daniel?
That's easy. I actually think that the partisan fights we see on foreign policy,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, actually don't yield or are not motivated by political calculations.
Meaning not responding to voters, you mean? Or
Not directly responding to voters. Israel, I might separate from that because that's obviously the major issue right now.
yeah.
And it would be insane for anyone to say that the politics around Israel are merely a theoretical debate. It's obviously hyper-voter focused and sensitive.
Yeah.
What I mean is the debates that we've been talking about on use of force in Iran,
Yeah.
whether to strengthen relationships with the Saudis, what's our posture going to be with Bahrain and the Emiratis? Those issues, I just don't think voters care about them.
These are very elite discussions, is your point.
Yes. And so as a result, I think members have a freer hand to assert positions that might be out of step with the average voter.
But do you think also at that elite level, there's a donor dynamic, meaning that there are people who are very organized in political action committees from the left of the party, not in the center, who are motivating some of this?
Yeah, let's name the sentiment that you're talking about. You called it neo-isolationism. Republicans now want to use the expression Jacksonian approach.
Yeah, Andrew Jackson. We're going back to the 19th century to lead our foreign policy into the 21st.
Honestly, I'm not sure what exactly to call it other than some kind of post-Iraq war fatigue.
Yes.
That anytime there is a question of using force, you see a progressive left and a more right-wing Republican unification on this idea of, oh my God, we're about to start another Iraq war here.
Yeah.
And that was manifest in the Iran debate that we just saw unfold. The immediate reaction of most Democratic leaders was not, I think, what Senator Schumer was trying to articulate of Iran is the worst actor in the Middle East right now, sowing chaos across the region. The U.S. has committed across administrations, Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon. That cannot be rhetoric. To be followed by, but you know what? You don't know what happens when you use force. That was not the approach that most members took. The approach instead was this visceral, immediate reaction of, oh my God, one, this is totally unlawful, legally not true. As the former general counsel of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I will attest to that. Two, leave open the possibility, at least, that it might have worked. And so I would have far preferred members not to have retreated into this Iraq war fatigue on the Democratic side, thinking that any use of force is about to cause a regional war, and instead keep a more open mind.
So how does that work, Elisa, maybe? And how does this, you respond as well, but are people organizing talking points? Like, how does this, it just doesn't happen organically. Are there people that are out there? Is it the former sort of JCPOA rally crew? Like, how does this dynamic produce what is basically an elite politics that misses some potential opportunities to address the threat from Iran and is disconnected from voters?
So I think Daniel alluded to it already, and that is that because members are relying in some ways on their own counsel here, right? I mean, they are, as they should be, they're elected officials, right? They're there for a reason. But it's less about being responsive to constituents and more about kind of their own perspective on these things. It's it's probably less organized than people suspect it is in some ways, right? Like it really is if a member of Congress framework is still very much tied to that post 9/11 Iraq war kind of framework.
Yeah.
And they're still reacting and responding in that context and not necessarily catching up to the fact that we're in 2025, not 2005.
Yeah, can I say something on that? Because I worked at the Center for American Progress, a place I love, right? And I've been there. I was there for like 18 years or something like that. And the word progressive, and I used to write articles on progressive foreign policy. Like, what does that mean? And then increasingly, especially in the Middle East, to your point, I thought that a lot of the so-called progressives, the self-styled progressives in recent years, were actually stuck in the past, which is ironic, stuck somewhere between banging against Cheney's war on terror and advocating for the Iran nuclear deal in 2015. And it sort of connects with the point you were making before. And I don't mean it in any disrespectful way. I'd love to have some of those friends come on and talk about this. But I feel like there are these new challenges, yet they're using a framework that isn't actually forward looking, i.e., progressive.
I think that's part of this.
Yeah.
There is absolutely an ecosystem of advocacy and thinkers who are producing things and sending them off. But to use a DoD term, I think a lot of that's kind of a self-licking like ice cream cone, right? The members will respond to those points that they already, I think, trust inherently will coincide with their worldview on these issues, and so there's a machinery there. But especially because these are reactive kind of moments. They're not kind of strategic thinking about the long term of US Middle East policy.
Yeah.
They're about reacting to a decision by this administration or by the government of Israel to take a certain action. They're kind of falling back on the tools they know and they're comfortable with and not necessarily kind of questioning the assumptions, as Daniel was saying. Like, are we in a different moment? Are the assumptions that we have held for 20 years about what conflict with Iran might look like different today because of what's happened over the last 2 years? And so therefore, the framework doesn't really apply as much.
Yeah,
Or it's different.
yeah, and I told you this. I mean, and again, this is my view, and but I told you like a month ago, Lisa, I was at a speech that Senator Chris Murphy gave at my former place of employment, Center for American Progress. This was before the Iran war, Israel's strikes against Iran, but it was after Trump's trip to the Middle East. And it was billed as, restoring America's leadership and alliances around the world. I thought, okay, big picture, we're going to get a big picture framework speech of the sort that we would hear back in the 2007s or 8s, people who were really not just challenging the war on terror frame of George W. Bush, but an alternative. And what I heard at its core, and you're shaking your head and you don't need to comment on this, was the big idea was this: we're going to cut off some of the arms sales to some of the Gulf states. Chinook helicopters aren't going to go. And I have a resolution of disapproval about this. And, with all due respect, because I've talked to Senator Murphy and been in meetings with him, we have mutual respect. I thought it was such a small idea, reactive to the frame that he was operating in, which was Trump's trip to the Middle East, all the concerns that I have about corruption and payola and things like this.
Yeah.
But the world is changing, including the Middle East, and it was not a big idea. I don't know if you agree with, you don't have to comment on that particular one. But it's my thought on it. And I wonder how we can actually hit the reset button if we, I don't know, computers still do Control Alt Delete on this thing, because I think what we've seen is this hyperpolarization that focuses on key things. And some of them, when I want to get to the tough ones, are really important. The conflict in Gaza, which seems to have no end in sight, and the genuine passion and the connection that people feel and fear about when something like a Palestinian American gets killed in the West Bank just the last couple of days. I'm not, this is part of the same politics that brought you here to that march, Daniel, is that people, right? I don't know if you agree with that, but how do you channel these things into actual outcomes so it's not just emoting in therapy, but produces different results?
Well, let me first observe that, Elisa, I thought you said it right, of the reaction that we saw to the Iran strikes was, it was a late Saturday night. Members didn't have a chance to consult with others. They were writing in 25-minute spurts an immediate reaction, and the safest place to go was just to say war powers violation and this was a problem. So I don't think you can discount in terms of assessing why did so many Democratic members come out against
Yeah,
this.
but like you're saying, this is a path dependency. So like, sorry, another example. I forget where you were, but I remember when Obama had his red line moment, if you remember that, in 2013.
Yeah.
And he took the walk on the White House lawn with Dennis McDonough, former colleague of mine at CAP, and he basically jammed everybody and said, "Hey, we're going to send this to Congress." And I remember our friend and your former colleague Mariah Sixkiller. She was working for Steny, where
Yep.
worked for her later, and talking to Mariah about all of this and going up and trying to brief members. And this was the same sort of knee-jerk reaction of, wait a second. And I think it was in this milieu of post-Iraq fatigue.
Very much so.
Yeah, sorry.
Very much so. One, exactly out of, you can't discount that the visceral immediate reaction is, I don't want to be out there supporting something that looks like Iraq Part 3.
Yeah.
And number two, the Trump factor. Unquestionably, the distrust of President Trump, I think, influences a lot of how Democrats these days respond on foreign policy.
Makes sense, because he's done little to build trust and confidence. And two, he operates, the president, with the politics of fragmentation, of not addition but subtraction, of actually trying to divide and conquer, even within his own party.
But interestingly, there are consistencies from the Biden administration to the Trump administration that if I were the one writing Senator Murphy's speech at CAP, what I would want to focus on, so not the negative aspects of should we be denying various arms shipments to the UAE or kind of the small ball stuff you were describing.
Yeah.
But the initiatives that I was referencing earlier on how do you leverage American technology, American defense firepower, what we excel at to strengthen Gulf partners.
Yeah.
And let's get into the data center business together. Like that kind of those initiatives, I think the Trump administration is continuing. I think that's where the action is.
Yeah, and you sort of did that, like in your past job at the Senate. I remember this. Weren't you crafting legislation? And this was before, and we're going to get into October 7th, and it's a tough conversation, but pre-October 7th, I remember that summer, you were crafting bipartisan legislation about U.S. engagement in the Middle East. Is that a good example of it, or you don't want to talk about it?
No, it's a good example of it. I mean, it birthing it was painful.
Why?
Because, well, for a couple of different reasons.
Sorry,
One,
what it is. Sorry.
so a piece of legislation that was trying to get back to affirmative agendas, right? Like, what do you want this relationship to look like moving forward between the United States and the Middle East? How do you take something that I think organically was a success from the first Trump administration, which is the Abraham Accords? Like, I will quibble with all kinds of things around it, but at its essence, it was something that both Democrats and Republicans organically could support. How do you take that and you move it forward? How do you make it not just about defense and hard security cooperation, but make it about the economic cooperation, make it about the integration that really scales, and starting very modestly about how the United States helps to move that ball forward. And it's easy to say now whether or not it was a good thing or a bad thing because it didn't go anywhere.
Right.
October 7th really kind of changed the discussions so dramatically that a piece of legislation like that just no longer had a place.
Yeah.
I hope it is resurrected by someone in the longer term, because it is the right place to go. Is how do we look at the kinds of things that government to government can do, but then also not government to really capitalize on the transformation that's happening not just in the Middle East, but in the world, but through the lens of the Middle East. And getting Democrats to support that wasn't great.
Why? How?
Because I think, in part, we're right back to the same, fundamental point, which is this hesitation to suggest that one is investing in the Middle East is more than the traffic can bear. That commits us to something in a region that is mired in conflict, that can drag us in with partners that may or may not share our values, right?
Yeah.
That whole kind of questioning the fundamentals of whether this is a place where the United States should focus comes into play. And then the just very partisan elements of everything that we do. I mean, you said it earlier, Brian, like agreeing on anything is hard. Negotiating something that you could do in a bipartisan fashion
Uh-huh.
is increasingly challenging.
Yeah.
Right? So even something like this, where all the kind of natural tendencies were to come together,
Yeah.
it 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 was not the easiest thing to do. I mean, I would have liked to have seen Democrats embrace it, really own it, right? You talked about advocacy on the outside, interests, constituents, et cetera. We had dozens and dozens of outside organizations from across the spectrum, to center right, to progressive, who supported something like this as a way to think about the U.S. Middle East relationship. And yet it didn't get the political support.
Uh-huh.
And so I think that brings us back to, is this where people want to be invested politically? And I think in that moment before October 7th, the answer was probably still no.
Yeah. 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 And I think it's not just a Democratic Party problem when we talk about the Democratic, but it's just something about our culture, the media and politics culture, where the most intense energy and even resources are dedicated to oppositional politics that try to tear down the other side, if you won't agree, rather than building coalitions. And I know we have friends like Rudy De Leon and others who lived and worked on the Hill back in a previous era, even when there was partisanship in the 70s and 80s and things like that. And it wasn't like that at all. And I think it's linked to social media, other dynamics, and this loss of a sense of purpose, a broader thing of a sense of national sort of pride and patriotism, and we're all in this together, even if we disagree on different views. So it is an internal Democratic Party problem, but really want to delve in a little bit to the complexity of October 7th and this 21 now month awful war. And
But I do want to just make one key point here, which is I am so proudly of the Steny Hoyer brand. Steny Hoyer represents that.
Remind everybody who Steny was.
Steny Hoyer is a longtime congressman from Maryland who has served as the House Majority Leader. I joined him when he was the Democratic Whip in 2014, and then became the House Majority Leader again through 2022.
Yeah.
And he's still serving as a lead appropriator. Just a extraordinary human being, and an amazing Democrat. And what he would always counsel us is, it's all about getting 400 votes. Don't worry about the substance of what's going into a piece of legislation. You want Congress to be the bully pulpit that it is and send a signal, whether it's a sanctions bill, whether it's a pro-Israel bill, or whatever it was, to send a signal to our allies and adversaries. This is what the U.S. Congress thinks.
Yeah.
And that requires compromise. And he was a master at that. Now, the point that I would stress is, I don't subscribe to the nostalgia of, well, it used to be that politics stops at the water's edge when it comes to foreign policy. And I'm like, no, we were always fighting on these issues, and that's okay. It's not just political. There are serious policy fights.
Right.
I would get so frustrated when Republicans, when we took the House back in 2019, and I felt like some Republicans had the temerity to say to us when we were negotiating the annual defense bill, you guys are politicizing this. You're putting things in here. Then I'm like, politicizing this? Oh my God! I lived through the Gitmo debates in the 2000s of where Republicans were forcing all kinds of stuff.
Right.
The anti-gay provisions that they were putting into the NDAA, forcing Democrats to vote. I'm like, you think we're politicizing this? We believe in this. This isn't politicizing. This is a policy fight. Let's have it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
And that's where we are now too, right? We'll get the same accusations that we're politicizing things that are really about fundamental policy differences that we're going to have to figure out how to reconcile if we want to be responsive
Yes.
to the American people.
Although I think what we're about to get into is the politics on the Middle East and Israel specifically, I think, have shifted.
Yeah, I agree. And what I was trying to say is that we actually live here in the summer of 2025 with a president who, those who voted against his big budget bill in July, he called evil. And it's this sort of black and white. And I think Democrats, some of them, engage in this symbiotic relationship, which it makes it sort of very destructive. So we would be remiss not to talk about the big issue, policy and politically, of the moment, which is this awful war that began with Hamas attacking Israel on October 7th, 2023. And it set off very complicated debates in this country, on college campuses, in my son's middle school, in Rockville, Maryland, in all sorts of places. And it touched people in ways that I think have been shocking to me. I think I know why, but I want to use sort of 10 minutes here to talk about sort of where we are as a party on this. And what I think the central question is, since you guys both have had front row seats on this, on the policy and politics of it, how do you explain what's gone on inside the Democratic Party over the last 21 months as this war has roiled, And in essence, we had factions when Biden was still the nominee, but then when Harris became the nominee last year, that did not even want to vote for the president reelection and was willing to sacrifice sort of a loss, which we got from Donald Trump. How do you sort of explain it, and where do you think sort of the center of gravity of the Democratic Party is today, Daniel?
Let me start with that last point of what do I consider to be the center of gravity? I observe two nearly irreconcilable phenomena taking place inside the party right now.
Yeah.
In one light, I unabashedly argue the center of the party remains centrists. The people who are able to get through the insane gauntlet of Democratic primaries and win a general election are not the Mamdanis of the world. It's the Alyssa Slotkins of the world.
That's Zohran Mamdani, the mayoral candidate for the Democrats in New York. Yeah.
Yes. And if you look at how we took back the House in 2019, it was not from highly progressive districts. We took back the House on the back of highly centrist members who said, I want to go to Washington to propagate common sense solutions. I'm willing to work with anyone to do that. So in terms of the political center of gravity, I still see those voices as the main players in the party. And I think that was manifest if you look at the 2024 Democratic platform, particularly on Israel.
But there's a big but coming up here, right?
There's absolutely a big but, which is that you'd have to have your head in the sand not to observe. Unquestionably, there's been a shift. I'll tell you anecdotally, personally, when I got to the Hill in 2007, I first worked for Tom Lantos, Great American, and then I worked for Howard Berman. And when we wanted to run an Israel-focused measure or something related to the Middle East, we would check with one or two people, Keith Ellison being one of them. He would give us a steer on, you know what, progressives probably can't live with this. You got to change this. And that's it. And we would do our coordination with the Republicans. We get it to the House floor. By the time I left in 2021, forget about legislation, even getting a letter to the floor stating two-state solution is a good idea was the most painful exercise that at a certain point we just felt like, oh my God, is it really worth the political capital to do this? And so I can describe in a second of why I think that's happening, but let me just observe the but here, no question, is that the party has shifted, or at least I think in Congress is hedging of sorts.
No, look, I lived in the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem back in the 90s. I talk to my friends all the time. I understand why it's objectively shifting. When you see people just trying to get food for their families in Gaza and what's happened in the last couple of weeks. And I actually really admire, respect sort of that impulse of like, we've got to do something different here, right? But oftentimes that different is not translated into what you said at the top was this proactive agenda for the Middle East and what we can actually get done. It's more trying to tear something down or call something different. How do you see it, Elisa, from your vantage point?
No, I mean, I was shaking my head for the audience in agreement with what Daniel was saying. What I would add is it's probably so much worse than what you remember from 2021 and 2020 going into 2022. I mean, that anecdotally thinking about, and I had a visceral reaction when you said it about the inclusion of the term two-state solution. And this goes to how the Democratic Party has to, by definition, also be responding to where the Republican Party is. Right? And I spent what felt like 7 years, but was probably an excruciating 3 months negotiating what was meant to be an anniversary resolution for Israel's 75th anniversary, uh, and not being able to say two-state solution in that resolution and expect Republicans to be on it. And so this idea that internally to the Democratic Party, there is that but that Daniel talked about, but I completely agree and would stand by the notion that by and large, the party is still more to center than I think it seems from the outside.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
think the voices on the progressive left are significant and voluminous, but not necessarily representative of the party in some kind of monolithic way. But we're struggling with also how to position how we feel about a commitment to Israel's security at the same time that we know Israel's security goes through some resolution to the Palestinian question.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Inevitably, indelibly, these things are tied. But with a party on the other side who doesn't subscribe to that notion in quite the same way. And so kind of what our internal debate can't be divorced from what we're dealing with on the outside.
Yeah, and I would add the Bibi Netanyahu variable to this, because what I saw in my schematic of an Act Two, the hyper-partisan sort of nature of the Israel-Palestine debate and Iran, mostly during Obama. I think you were on the Hill, you were in the administration at the time when Netanyahu went and spoke to Congress in 2015, and I know Democrats who are pro-Israel, but they saw this as people inside of Israel and Bibi's camp playing politics with this issue and trying to fragment. And my view at the time, and it was not a popular one at the Center for American Progress, but it was my view, is that trying to make these issues, the U.S.-Israel relationship, a partisan wedge issue at a time when you had so much going on in the world, was bad for America's long-term security interests, and it was bad for Israel as well. But you had the leader of Israel doing that. And I think that's an additional factor. And that's not just related to the Obama administration. It goes back to the 90s, the first go around when Netanyahu was prime minister. And I know some of my mentors, people who served in the Clinton administration, saw how he operated in a way that did not comport with this spirit of bipartisanship that a lot of the pro-Israel groups say that they're all about. But when the leader of Israel itself and the people around him don't do that, that complicates things. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
I would agree. I think the Democratic Party, Democratic caucus in the House is still impacted by that 2015 speech. I think it was a gross miscalculation on Netanyahu's part, to the extent he has repeatedly said in public and private meetings in which I've been in the room, that the bipartisan relationship between Israel and the U.S. is a strategic asset for Israel. This was a huge...
He degraded it by his action.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it was just a wild miscalculation. But I also think that, honestly, Brian, emotionally, part of what frustrates me with the debate about what's happening inside the Democratic Party right now and how a lot of Democrats are responding to what's happening in Israel is that for those of us sitting at this table right now in this room, we know that anything involving Israel, the Palestinians in the region, is so goddamn complex that there's a fundamental question when it comes to Gaza. What should Israel have done post-October 7th? What should it do right now? Now, as a national security expert, I have a pretty affirmative idea right now of what I think Israel should do.
Yeah.
That involves, frankly, I think it involves Trump locking the Qataris and the Israelis in a room together and saying no one's getting out of here until we have a ceasefire.
Don't forget the Egyptians.
And the Egyptians, 100%. But, and there might even have to be quiet representatives, not directly from Hamas, but people who we know have Hamas's ear, who can get a ceasefire and end this. And the fact that it's not happening is deeply troubling. But my point is, there is a level of nuance here that those who have lambasted Israel for the last year and a half need to answer, which is, one, what Brett McGurk said in Aspen yesterday of there's a lot of rewriting of history here. Why did Hamas continue to reject ceasefire proposals over the last year?
Yeah.
Two, what is Israel's choices? Not today, because I think there is a choice today, but for the first 6 months of that conflict, what other choice did they have but to go after what they saw as an existential threat?
Yeah, I think that's right. I want to hear what Elisa has to say about that. But I think the first 6 months, you could have actually seen the Biden administration do more with our Arab partners who actually were offering a viable pathway and have continued to repeat it again and again. Most recently in March of 2025 in this administration, of we're willing to actually help underwrite the security of Gaza. A different conception there. We're actually going to use our billions that we're going to make from AI and tech and things like this. Yet, I didn't see neither the current Trump administration or the Biden administration engaging them in that sort of way. For Biden, I think it was they were caught in the crisis management moment, trying to get hostages home, including American hostages, some of whom I know, all of that.
And don't discount the Bibi factor there as well.
Yeah.
He was not making it easy to get traction with the Egyptian proposal, for example. And frankly, this might be a little controversial, but as a national security analyst today, I'll tell you that I still don't think the Israelis have a sense of the level of day-to-day suffering that's happening on the ground in Gaza.
Yeah,
I don't think the Israeli media is.
Yeah, we had Ibrahim Delalshe and Shir Efron a few months ago on the podcast, and they actually said that. They admitted that they don't see each other's pain, and I think that's a big part of it because then that filters up into politics and things.
Well, so,
Elisa.
I mean, everything he just said. No, but I mean, I think you're right. The immediate aftermath of October 7th, for all kinds of reasons, from a security perspective, from a strategic one, from a deeply unprecedented, traumatic event that you don't want to see repeated in any way ever again, right? Like there weren't all that many choices in the immediate aftermath. But everyone we know and respect has said this in one form or another, is how do you translate kind of those tactical wins of the first 6 months into kind of a strategic win? And that's where we lost the bubble, right? Where we collectively lost the bubble, where our Arab partners had good ideas, but maybe not willing to be even more creative about what could change in that framework to bring this Israeli government and this Israeli population along in the aftermath of something so traumatic. Our friends in the Biden administration using leverage that was available to them to make those kinds of discussions even more focused and acute than they already were. It's all easy in hindsight, right? But that transformative moment still exists. It's very different. And I will say, like, having been to the region in the 2 weeks after October 7th, the basic notion that I got from the meetings that I sat in Israel, in the Gulf, in Egypt and elsewhere was the longer this goes on, the harder it will be, right? We all recognize what just happened, the threat, the Hamas and other groups that are bent on Israel's destruction are also not groups that are friendly to the governments of our Arab partners. That was a shared analysis, right? But ultimately, translating that into something more transformative has been eroded significantly. Is it lost? I don't think so.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a hell of a lot more than I think is in the offing right now to translate this into the end and not just a 60-day ceasefire, but an actual enduring ceasefire that sets us up for something much bigger and more sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, we had a webinar with Nimrod Novik and Omar Shadban, an Israeli and Palestinian analyst that's on our website at mei.edu. You can check out in mid-July, and we talked about these dynamics. Real quick, just to round out this topic, and then we'll talk a little bit about your advice to the future generations. Very quick, true or false question. New York City mayoral candidate, Democratic mayoral candidate, Zohran Mamdani's phrase, globalize the intifada, will ultimately beat out America first as the winning political narrative in America and win Democratic power in 2026 and 2028. True or false?
You go first, Brian.
Yeah.
So
I'm with Daniel. You go first.
False. The fact that he won't even stand by it right now demonstrates the effect of politics. That American politics, you need to build coalitions and listen to multiple constituencies. And when you use sort of ideas that I think reflect a certain sentiment, which is genuine, that too many Palestinians have been killed, but then if it's translated in certain ways that people just can't hear you, that it shuts off conversations. I think it's false, but you guys can go with the true if you want. That's what.
No, I'm going to go with false as well. I feel like people like you, me, and Elisa play this role of therapists of sort of trying to just calm people down. That Mamdani's election was a highly particular phenomenon at a unique moment in New York City politics. I'm telling my friends in the Jewish community, it does not necessarily reflect this massive shift in democratic politics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that said, I was disappointed that the chair of the DNC didn't say what he eventually tweeted, which is, sure, we are a Big Ten party. We do not support globalize the intifada as part of our platform.
Mm-hmm.
And he eventually said it, and he said all the right things. I'd like to think the instincts of the party are to tie those two things together, but I appreciate he's in a tough position. There's not much he can do.
Yeah.
Being asked about a local New York City race, but I wouldn't read so much into the Mamdani dynamics.
Yeah, false. Absolutely. I mean, New York politics is anathema anyway, right? Like, I mean, who understands it besides New Yorkers? And so I'm not entirely sure that folks should consider that as representative of what the people of New York are actually looking for, why they voted for him in the first place, which I really don't think has to do with anything in the national security space. But to Daniel's point, we've got to be vigilant to ensure that there isn't that drift to being not clear about not being a party that wants to be divisive, that wants to break things down, that wants to use violence as a tool.
Yeah.
You said it about our friends on the Republican side, particularly in how President Trump approaches some of these issues about divide and conquer and break down. We've got to be vigilant to ensure that our party doesn't adopt measures or postures that feel kind of the same. I don't think we are.
Yeah.
We're going to have to be. We're going to have to be really careful to ensure that keeps happening.
So, last true or false question. The Democratic Party today in 2025 could do a much better job in giving voice to the concerns of Palestinians, Palestinian Americans, and others who have an aspiration for a two-state solution that you guys talked about, that we're not doing anything at all. True or false?
I'm struggling with it because it's not a democratic question. Democrats don't hold power right now.
Right. We're in the minority.
We're in the minority. We don't control the institution.
Yeah.
I would say that is the U.S. Congress using its bully pulpit to support diplomatic initiatives to bring this conflict to an end? I would argue no. Now we can have a healthy debate on, can Congress ever wield that kind of power?
Right. But the question I'm asking, and we saw this in the 2000s, the first decade, where Iraq really became a bully pulpit for an agenda on Iraq, the Obama administration's agenda on Iraq, voices not only Democrat, but then Republican, took on board ideas that were floated in legislation. And what I'm seeing is oppositional, like inside the party, North Carolina resolution that condemns Israel's so-called apartheid and things like this. But what I don't see is that proactive agenda that recognizes that there are millions of Palestinians there. I take your point. Certainly Republicans are doing that as well. But if your end point is a two-state solution,
so I would argue, I would argue true then in terms of, I think way too many elements of the party, particularly on the left, have fixated on demonizing Israel rather than doing what you are describing of trying to reach a compromise on espousing a two-state solution.
Yeah, Daniel just said it there. I think true in that, not surprisingly, we are focused on what is a horrific situation in Gaza that has gone on for much longer than it should. But ultimately, the answers to Gaza don't live just in Gaza, right? They're answers that require people to be talking about what the resolution to this overall conflict look like today, also not trapped in maybe the mid-90s.
Yeah,
For
sure.
But with taking advantage of the changes that have happened in the region, where maybe you do have an interest by those in the region to do things differently than they may have done before. And so how do you really galvanize ideas and start articulating them in a way that gets to this bigger, more strategic need? So true is the answer, but it's not confined to just resolving Gaza.
Yeah.
Right? It's Gaza plus.
Yeah. And so I'm going to close out by thanking both of you. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, but then we also skimmed the surface a lot. And I feel like we could have another 2-hour discussion on this. And I think we will. Maybe not on my podcast, but I think at dinners and things like that. And I appreciate you coming here and wrestling with these ideas. As I said to the audience, this won't be the last time that we'll tackle this topic. It's a little different. We're usually focused on policy substance. But here in America, politics informs policy. And we need to, and I hope that stays the case. But and I think we need to deal with that last question, and we'll keep it brief. But some of our listeners, I hope, are people who are the next generation who want to do what you guys have done. And I really, not only your friends, but I respect sort of everything you've done professionally. I hope you feel it. What's the one bit of advice you tell a young person right now in this uncertain environment about going into a public policy career or whatever you guys are doing right now? What would you say they need to be doing? Elisa.
So if you care about a part of the world the way those of us at this table do, live there. Be in the place, learn the language, learn what the people are about and what they care about. The policy conversation at the elite level is what's interesting and glamorous, but it's fed by what's really happening on the ground. So live there. A. B. Figure out what you want in terms of mentorship from those of us who have done it before, and then ask us for that.
Yes.
Right?
Don't be bashful.
Don't be bashful. People are prepared to do it, but be clear about what you want and then ask for it. And then I think the third thing I would say is, and maybe this is because I'm getting older, learn from our mistakes, but don't entirely dismiss our experience, right? There is something to be learned from those of us who have the battle scars. Take it on to your own analysis and figure out what comes next in a way that maybe we weren't able to see, but don't just assume that that what we have to offer is stuck in the aughts or the 90s.
Yeah, great advice. Daniel, so say there's a young man or woman out there who wants to just grow up and be just like you.
God help them. What do you say they got to do? I want to first foot stomp Elisa's point. You got to get your hands dirty and you have to get focused. People who come to Washington and say, well, I want to do foreign policy. I'm like, what does that mean? What are you passionate about? So live in a country, get your hands dirty, focus on a particular issue, which for me, the way I got into this business was as a lawyer, that gave me a seat at the table. So the more specific you can be, just get a seat at the table and then figure it out from there. So get your hands dirty, be focused. Number two, both seek mentors, but also don't be shy about leveraging contacts you make through internships, through your school, through other means to ask for further connections.
Yeah, great advice.
This is a business of networking.
Yes.
Use it. I got my 2 first jobs in Washington by staying in touch with the people that I had interned with.
Yes. Always stay in touch.
Always stay in touch. That's second. And number 3, this might sound terribly hokey, but the best training I got for what I did on Capitol Hill was a peer counseling service program I did when I was in college. It was, I know I'm loquacious and speak a lot, but I actually learned, 1, how to ask really good questions, and 2, how to allow for breaks in the conversation and listen.
Yes.
And I can't tell you how many times I was in the room on highly sensitive, challenging negotiations with Republicans or meeting with foreign leaders, and an ability to ask questions, to slow down a conversation and to hear what someone is saying.
Yeah.
That is critical, I think, to being successful in foreign policy.
Priceless.
Amen.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Elisa, for being great colleagues, friends, and guests on the podcast of Taking the Edge Off the Middle East. That's all the time we have for this episode this week. You can follow the podcast at MEI at all of the places that you get your social media, Facebook, X, I think we're on LinkedIn and things like that. And again, please offer your commentary on the podcast website. That's all the time we have for this episode. I'm Brian Catoulis. We'll see you next time.